Welcome to the Storymakers Podcast, a place where curiosity and play meet to spark faith through the imagination. I'm your host, Mel, and I'll introduce you to new friends who will share hope for the kids and teens in your life, with a dose of encouragement for us grown-ups too. Let's get the party started. Hey, Storymakers! I'm super pumped up. I'm here with my friend, Brennan Breed, Dr. Brennan Breed from Princeton Theological. We're so excited to have him here today because Storymakers loves a good story, and you know all the ins and outs of the story, the old stories in the Old Testament, and we cannot wait to get the party started. So Brennan, let us know who you are. I'm so excited to have you. Catherine is Brennan's wife, and shout out to all the Lily cohorts, she is leading the charge in that space, and that's how I got to know Brennan. So Brennan, let us know a little bit about who you are and how your story's been captured by God's story.
Thanks. Thank you so much for having me. Storymakers is wonderful. My family and I are huge fans, as you can see from all of our Storymakers gear that we have around here. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's a wonderful what you all do, and it's so exciting and creative, and it really is a breath of fresh air in a space that sometimes feels, like it needs a little bit of creativity. So at any rate, thank you all for what you do. So for me, I grew up, and my parents lived in New York when I was born, so lived in the city for a little bit. Then we moved out to the countryside, out to Colorado, to the middle of nowhere south of Denver. And when I was a little kid, I used to wake up and look at the mountains, and I used to love seeing the sunrise come over the mountains. And it's very biblical. The Bible associates the tops of mountains with God's presence. And I think I got that as a little kid, waking up and seeing these awe-inspiring, beautiful Rocky Mountains. And to me, that was always something that I associated with God, was the beauty of nature, but also wonder and awe and reverence. My parents would read Bible stories to me as a kid, even just the unfiltered, uncut Old Testament. We got all of it from Deuteronomy, the real deal.
Gen X, shout out to Gen X right here. Right, parents were a little free with the parenting.
Yep. And so, yeah, we read Daniel when I was a little kid too. But my imagination really got captured when I was in college. I started to volunteer with youth ministries like Young Life and with the church ministry and helping out kids read the Bible. All of a sudden, I got much more interested in the Bible as well and started to see some of the power of stories to help change kids' lives. So my life was changed in the process. After college, I went to Virginia Beach to teach algebra, but also in a high school, Frank W. Cox High School in Virginia Beach, shout out. But I also was working at a Galilee Episcopal Church, and so was Catherine. So we lived next door to each other at the beach, Catherine and I, both working with the youth ministry there. And in the process, I discovered that I really loved teaching about the Bible. And I love teaching algebra, but even more so, I love teaching about the Bible. So that was when Catherine and I both went to seminary at Princeton Seminary. And that started our trajectory, both working now in theological education.
So cool. Well, one of the things that I love so much about your story is that you're involved in youth ministry, which is, I think, a core place for so many of us who are in ministry now. So shout out to all of you who are youth ministry. Maybe you're eating too much pizza, staying up way too late. You're making a huge impact. And you never know where your story's going to go. It's not maybe going to stay in the adolescent space. Lots of shift shaping happens. Just hang in there. It's really important. The other cool thing I love about your story too, Brennan, is I think you have an amazing curiosity, and what we love to talk about here in Storymaker world is like breathing new life into the old stories. Mm-hmm. And when I was doing Sunday school, I was coming across all of these stories and thinking, what this is wild. And when you begin to visualize them and imagine them and the details that come with them, like seraphim and all sorts of wild characters, giants, whales, all sorts of things are happening there. So it's no wonder that your imagination was captured, and this is where your work and life is. I can only imagine how much fun it is to get into the weeds and the details in this space. But today we're going to talk, friends, about Daniel, because Brandon knows a lot about the book of Daniel. And I don't know, some of you may be confused about Daniel. I was as a kid. It's kind of a confusing story and lots of plot twists, lots of twists and turns. We kind of stick with the lion's den, and sometimes we get stuck in the furnace. But beyond that, like, what is Daniel all about? So Brandon's going to break it down for us. So grown-ups, this is great because when you're thinking about talking about these big stories with your kids, you really need some tools and tricks of the trade to get there, so it doesn't just like fly over their heads. But maybe, Brandon, you can set the picture up for us. Like, how should we be thinking about Daniel? And then we'll talk about, like, how do we talk to kids about Daniel?
Yeah, thanks so much. And I got interested in the book of Daniel when I was in my PhD program at Emory University. And my advisor, Carol Newsom, she was working on the book of Daniel. And so I kind of had to pay attention to it a bit. But I remember the first couple of days of class when we were reading it, I was really captivated. I mean, these are wonderful and beautiful stories. They're troubling stories, but also that shift to apocalyptic literature in chapter 7 is a pretty abrupt one. And I ended up realizing that the stuff that I thought was kind of embarrassing or maybe a little bit like offensive, it's just kind of weird stories, Yeah, like everyone's going to die in the end or something, I ended up realizing that those are incredible stories of hope. So one of the things I really love about the Bible, and one of the things I like to study as a scholar of the Bible, is what's called reception history. It's kind of a strange term, but really what it means is what the Bible has done. So a lot of biblical scholars want to study the ancient world, like the context of origin, like where did the Bible come from? Who wrote this story? I love those questions too. And I think it helps us so much to try to understand, like, where did this Bible come from? What was normal for these folks? If you were like studying literature of today, right? But you lived like 2,000 years in the future. So if you're studying literature from the year 2025, right? Yeah. And you were reading like, I don't know, whatever, the Harry Potter books or something, you might need to like understand something about the year 2020 or 2010, whatever, in order to kind of get what that literature was really about. And in the same way, for us to really understand these ancient folks who were trying as hard as they could to express who God was, this God that they had met in the world, but they could only express it in the words that they already knew. They could only express it in the ideas or symbols or images that they already knew and were already familiar with. So when we read these stories, they come to life if we think about that ancient context. But as a biblical scholar, I'm also interested in what people have done with these stories since. Like, how have they made a difference in people's lives and in the world? So, like, what kind of art have people made who have read the book of Daniel? Or what kind of music have they made? Or what kind of films have they made? All of those, I think, are really amazing.
Context is everything, right? So it sets up the stage, and you kind of want to have a picture of where the story is coming from and who the people are. And their frameworks, so you can get your head around it. But then, outside of that context, then what? Yeah.
And in the book of Daniel, one of the things I realized when writing about and thinking about what people have done with this is that, it's made some crazy stuff. Like, people have made predictions about the end of the world. Lots of them, none have come true so far. So some people have used Daniel in some strange ways that haven't made a lot of sense. But also, I just time and again came back to groups of people who were in real trouble and reached out to God and trusted, because they had read the book of Daniel, they trusted that God was going to be with them in their worst moments, and that God would pull them through. And that the thing they really had to do was just have faith. That seems to be the core message of the entire book of Daniel, is that God is with you to the very end. And that like, all you're asked to do really is just to believe that God is with you. I mean, the book of Daniel doesn't tell you to start a revolution or to try to like fix all of the problems in the world. Of course, it's a good thing to try to fix problems, but the book of Daniel really tells you that your job is to just believe, trust that God is with you and that God loves you and that God is for you. And to me, that's a really powerful image, and it's worked in all these amazing ways throughout history.
That's so cool. Well, you know what? When the book begins, it's like Daniel being captured. There's so many scenarios throughout Daniel where he has no control over his future. Yeah. He's forced in a way, like, I mean, I don't know what he could have. There's so many scenarios where he has no control. And I think that that's so true for us in our own life experiences, where there's so many things that we don't have control of. And what I love about Daniel too is you can really see the ways in which God is moving and stepping into those spaces. And that happens for us too today. We're not stuck in a furnace, but it may look like something totally different. So Brandon, if you were like looking at the whole text, the body of work, how would you section it off? Like what is happening kind of section by section?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, so the book of Daniel really, it makes a lot more sense if we do think of it in terms of these groupings or sections. It's really a book in two parts. So chapters 1 through 6, and then chapters 7 through 12 are two almost entirely different books. They're in two different genres or like types of stories. So chapters 1 through 6 are all stories that we call court tales. And other cultures had these kinds of stories too. These were stories where someone gets trapped or caught or displaced and ends up in the court of a foreign king. And they're put in these kind of tension situations where they have to choose between their own loyalty to themselves and their community and like loyalty to the empire and loyalty to the king. Or like, how do you kind of do your job so you don't get killed or fired, but then also not put your people in danger, right? But also, how do you like survive and how do you keep your identity? And so, like I said, there were some other people, other cultures that, like, say, the Babylonians displaced. There were some other cultures who wrote some of these stories. The books of in the Bible that we call the court story books, like Daniel, and then Esther is another one. We can see a little bit of these other stories, like in the Joseph story, where he's in the court of Pharaoh. These stories in the Bible have a very unique kind of focus, and that's it's focused not on just kind of retaining their job or their life. It really is about keeping their communal identity, which is a unique thing. Right? That is to say that the Jews were the first people in the history of the world to really survive in diaspora. Like, they were spread all around and they kept their identity. And this was a strange thing, but also, not only that, their identity was shaped around and focused on their unique worship of their God. So other cultures, they would worship the local gods of wherever they were displaced to. But the Jews, they stuck out. They stuck out because they stubbornly refused to worship other gods, and they worshiped their own, which put them at danger and put them at risk. And so we see this come up in Daniel 1 through 6, all those first 6 chapters. Each chapter is its own story. And all those stories focus on choices that Daniel and his friends have to make, about compromises that they have to make living in a foreign empire. They have to compromise on their dress, and they have to compromise on their names, and they have to compromise on what they learned and like their identities in many ways. But Chapter 1, they won't compromise on their food. There's food rules about being Jewish that are unique and different. And these are about their identity. It's about preserving your identity. And then Chapter 2, right? Chapter 3, Chapter 4, there's different ways that there's almost like contests or tricks to try to get them to give up their faith in their God. And time and again, they come back to reassuring and restating their faith in their God. And I would say that there are things in our lives that we can think about. In our day and age, Christians have conversations. Christians are having a lot of questions about what it is that they're trying to preserve, that really, like, what do we change? And what really matters? What do we hold on to? And the book of Daniel is all about that conversation. What really is uniquely important about the Jewish identity in Daniel 1 through 6. But we can ask that question about ourselves today. What's uniquely important about Christian identity? In Daniel 1 through 6, they don't try to force their identity on others. That's one thing that's really important. Daniel's job isn't to try to make everyone else think like he does. In fact, that's what King Nebuchadnezzar does sometimes. But Daniel seems to not like this. So all to say, this is an interesting question for us.
That's so cool. I love that. I've never heard of the court stories. So Moses would have had a court story.
Yeah. Nehemiah.
Nehemiah, they're everywhere.
Yeah.
So we're going to drop this
a strange thing.
Makers, guys. Court stories. You heard it here.
Yeah. And then the second half is that apocalyptic literature. And that's pretty different. That's, something really, really different's going on there.
Yeah. So people really love to zero in on that. I mean, I get it. It's like, it's sort of like, I don't know, the future unseen and all the possibilities, and trying to unravel some sort of, I don't know, maybe our minds like to go to those places, but tell us what it really means, or generally what's Daniel trying to say in that section.
Yeah. So chapters 7 through 12 are part of this other genre. So court stories is chapters 1 through 6. Chapter 7 through 12, everything changes. It's almost like going from like a romantic comedy to like a horror film. You know what I mean? Like everything changes. But what stays the same is the character of Daniel. And what the new genre or the new type of story that we enter into in chapter 7 is we call it apocalyptic literature. And it's a very unique genre in the ancient world. We think Jewish folks invented this. That is to say, what didn't exist before ancient Jews. The authors behind a lot of books is like a huge explosion of apocalyptic literature in the couple centuries before the time of Jesus. So that is to say, there's this like huge body of literature. And so the Dead Sea Scrolls preserve a lot of these books that didn't make it into the Bible, but that were Jewish apocalyptic literature, like the Assumption of Moses and the War Scroll. Yeah. And these things are all they are basically about a fight, a big contest that's happening between the forces of good and the forces of evil. And the forces of good look like they're losing. And it looks like God, who's behind the forces of good, is weak. And actually the forces of evil are going to win. And the forces of evil are tied to these big imperial powers that are almost making a mockery of the idea that the God of Israel is important, because they're destroying Israel, they're destroying the people of God. And the secret of apocalyptic literature, the secret that is revealed, apocalypse really means to unveil or reveal something. That's what that word means. We
really got into the secret in the 90s.
Yeah, that's right. So that secret is that, God actually secretly is on the side of good and will overpower evil one day. So this is like the big idea. Now, I'd say that the books, two halves of Daniel, really do hang together. The first and second part of Daniel, those chapters 1 through 6 and then 7 through 12, are the parts of the Bible that use one word more than any other book in the Bible, and that is sovereignty. Sovereignty, so like political power. And the idea there is that the sovereignty in the world, like when you look around, who has the power in the world, it doesn't seem to be God. It seems to be bad people. And wherever you look, there always seem to be people who are not following what God wants to do, right? And they're looking out for themselves, and they're hurting others, or they're hurting the environment. They're hurting, there are people who are, there seems to be some bad stuff going on in the world, and it seems that God is not in charge. And the book of Daniel says, actually, secretly behind it all, when the world doesn't seem like it, God is actually in charge. So for Daniel and his friends, they're in exile. Their city's been destroyed. Their city with the temple that God was supposed to be in. The Davidic kingship looks like it's gone forever. Everything they had hoped in as like a sign, a tangible sign of God's presence and power and love, seems to have vanished into thin air. And the world seems to be controlled by this evil empire. And anyone who had two brain cells to rub together would say, Yahweh doesn't exist, or it isn't strong, or died, or, why would you keep believing in your God? And lots of ancient peoples gave up on their identities, gave up on their gods, and just joined in with the big empires. But for some reason, these stubborn Jews refused to do that, and they continue to believe that their God, despite all appearances, remains the sovereign one. And I love that in Daniel 1 through 6 and 7 through 12, both those halves, they talk about this word a lot, but also that you can't figure this out on your own. There's no way that the smartest people in the world are in Daniel 1 through 6, all these magicians and sorcerers and wizards, but also like these accountants and people who work for the empire.
It was boring. Daniel especially, it's like, then they brought the magicians, and then they got the sorcerers. You're like, this is like the best book ever, guys.
Yeah. And so all these smart people cannot figure it out. But Daniel isn't smarter than anyone else necessarily. He is smart, but he just prays. And God reveals to him the secret that God has actually been in control this whole time. And that if you look at Daniel, like Daniel chapter 1 doesn't blame the exile on their sin. Chapter 9 does, but that's later. But Daniel chapter 1 seems to suggest like God allowed this to happen for an untold reason. And if you look at Daniel chapters 1 through 6, Daniel's not really the main character. It's really Nebuchadnezzar, the one who changes. Nebuchadnezzar over time ends up understanding that this God, the God of these dispersed Jews, actually is the powerful one behind all of the power in the universe, including his. And this, I think, is really this is like the subtle message of the book of Daniel, is that this exile happened for lots of reasons, but one of those reasons was to spread abroad this understanding of who this God really is, and to put these Jewish people in these positions where they could speak to people in positions of power, but also speak to everyone else they met, and to communicate who their God really was.
So cool. Well, we're always, And we're never disappointed when we're writing and getting into the text and bringing it to life for kids. You always find redemptive narratives. You always find God moving towards unseemly characters like Nebuchadnezzar. And then there's always hope. I remember writing this zine last year, right after this is December 2024. So everything had sort of Israel, Palestine, there's so much unraveling, and I think a real heaviness in the world. And going through Daniel, I found so much hope. I think that these stories reflect and remind us that God is on the move in the midst of places like we were talking about, like, where is Yahweh in the midst of this? Like, who's in control? Where's the sovereign? So I think that Daniel has that quality to it. Brendan, so if you were highlighting for a Sunday school teacher or a parent, like, where's the redemptive thread? Who is the character that you see God moving towards that's like, what? So
I'd say like thinking about those two parts of Daniel as really speaking to two different situations. And we might find ourselves, or our community or our country or the world might find itself in these different situations at different times. And I'd say Daniel 1-6 is speaking to a people who could possibly live in exile. Like, this is okay. It's not good. But Nebuchadnezzar's not trying to kill you, at least sometimes, for being who you are. It's possible to survive, even thrive. So I'd point to like Jeremiah chapter 29. He's writing a letter to the exiles, and he's telling you it's okay. You can live in Babylon, pray for the peace of Babylon, try to live there, plant gardens, get married, have kids, and so on. This is all, it's not all good, but God is with you in all of this. And the work that you're doing to preserve your identity, your community, and your faith, and pass it on to the next generation is going to reap more than you could imagine, right? So that's one way to think about it. Daniel 1-6, I think, is for those situations. Daniel 7-12 is speaking to a later time. So Daniel's having visions of much later in history, and he's having visions of after the time of Alexander the Great, after the Greeks have conquered kind of the known world for folks who lived in the Middle East. So Daniel's having these visions of a time that's very different, when it's not possible to continue to believe that God is just, it's difficult to survive in exile, but it's possible. Daniel's having visions of a time where it's not possible. And this is a vision of a future time, and we think it's the year 167 BC. So it's this time when a Greek king got really angry at the Jewish people who were living in Jerusalem. They had come back from exile, refounded Jerusalem. And this Greek king wanted to basically take all the money out of the temple. And he wanted to erect images of his Greek gods in the temple, and call the temple in Jerusalem by the name of a Greek god, Zeus Olympios. And the Jewish people said no, that they didn't want this. The Greek king, for the first time that we know of in the history of the world, thinks the religion is the problem. And he tries to eradicate the religion of Judaism. And we think this was like not an idea people had. Daniel chapter 6, like they say, don't pray to your God for 30 days, but they don't say don't pray to your God ever again. So this was a very different idea. And this didn't make sense to the Jewish people. And it seems like their theology really broke. In Daniel chapter 7-12, focus on this time when the Jewish people said, it's not like the exile. The exile was God trying to like do something. We don't think that this is God trying to do something. God can't be killing us for having faith in God. So something else is happening here. And this is really the first time they start to really think carefully about evil. That evil is greater than just the evil that's in a human heart. There's something really kind of bigger out there. And so they start to ask these deep questions about the evil in the world. And so Daniel 7-12 is God revealing to us that, there are events that happen in this world that are different from the exile. And it's really not me. God's saying, it's not me doing this. This is an evil power that's greater than humans, but that's less than me. But that's what God is asking us to trust, is that God is going to eventually set the world to rights. So I think these are like the two, if you find yourself in a place where it's almost impossible to have hope, Daniel 7-12 really is written for you. And this could be a personal issue, it could be a communal issue, it could be a national, global issue. Daniel 1-6 is really written to give advice to people who find themselves in livable but difficult situations. And I think, if we see those differences, we can appreciate it for the full spectrum of theology that it offers.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, it's so helpful to have it broken out, because if you just trying to digest it as like one big story, it's just you can't understand it. It's too confusing.
Yes,
I mean, it's really, really confusing if you don't have it broken out in that kind of a way in your mind. But also pictures help. So
yes, they help so much. These are beautiful pictures.
That really, if you're really tripped up, the going through the kids stuff is really helpful. Like reading a kid's Bible around the context is really, really helpful. And we try to really break it down too and make it accessible. But I think that there's so much visual imagery in the book of Daniel. And so I think that really helps understand or be able to see how big the context of it all is. But you do have that sense of awe and wonder, like the big mountaintop. Like you're like, this is like otherworldly and beyond us in so many ways. It's just such a big, it's such a big reveal. I would say, and so the pictures and the imagery really help tie it all together. So Brandon, what's your favorite story in the book of Daniel? I know we usually think about like the furnace, or we think about the lion's den. Is there something that really sticks out to you that captured you?
I gotta say, I like all the big hits. I like the greatest hits of Daniel. The lion's den and so on. But really, my favorite is Daniel 12. And it's the shortest chapter in the book of Daniel. And if we're going to break out the second half of Daniel, we'd say chapter 7 is a vision, chapter 8 is a vision, chapter 9 is a vision, or a story and a vision. But then chapters 10 through 12 are really kind of like one unbroken story, and it's in different parts. But chapter 12 is really the end of this big, long vision about the end. I love it because it's really the earliest clear reference to resurrection in the Bible. There are little hints here and there before this, but this is the first time anyone really put to words this idea that death is not the victor. That if you read a lot of the Old Testament, like when Jacob dies, he's like, well, I'm old and full of days, and he's really sad that his son died. But everyone goes down to Sheol, or David dies, he goes down to Sheol. You can go down to Sheol happy, or you can go down to Sheol sad. But Sheol is this place of the dead, and it's like they don't have a lot of deep thoughts about what happens after death. They just kind of accept it, and they say to be continued, right? Someday we'll figure this out.
Sometimes really story makers always say someone dies, we say like, and they were no more.
And they were no more.
And they were no more.
That's right. And they were no more. And this really is. I think this is this picture is beautiful. This book at the end, right? And this idea that there's this book, right, that God has, and that this book tells us that our lives are not ended with death, and that there is something more than that God's power over life is actually greater than death itself. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. And I do think that this is, the core of the Christian message. And it's something that, becomes more clear over time within the Christian community. But it's this little glimmer, I think, that is beautiful and wonderful for the Easter season too.
Yeah, Brandon, I mean, this is so helpful. And I'm sure so many grownups are out there listening who have been taught Daniel in many, many ways, or maybe we just got the greatest hits and they're like, and then things got a little really confusing at the end. And we just kind of like, what about Jonah?
Right.
I think that's sort of kind of the shuffle that happens around Daniel, but there's so much hope in Daniel. I would say definitely take a deep dive into Daniel. And also I feel like it holds the weight of the things that we're all sort of dealing with in this world, right? Like you were talking about, be individually, communally, like globally, like the weight of the world kind of feels described in this book, and it kind of handled in a way, and that it's not too big for Yahweh. I think is so cool. Brennan, when you think about Daniel, and you're an art historian also around biblical text, is there a specific piece of art or visual language that you're like, go check this out? This is a great way to kind of digest or like dig into Daniel.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, there's a lot. I've written like part of a book on kind of art and music and so on that has to do with Daniel. So I've got a lot to choose from, but if there's one piece that really captures my imagination, I love the painting by Rembrandt that is of Daniel 5, and it's the handwriting on the wall. And I love it for a few different reasons. Rembrandt was trying really hard in his own day to figure out like what would this writing say and how would it look and so on. But it's got the disembodied handwriting on the wall, but also just the look on Belshazzar's face, the king's face, is to die for. But it's this moment of the deep surprise from someone who thought that they had the world in their hands, right? That they controlled the world. And the hand is like a metaphor for power all throughout the Bible, the hand of God or the hand of a king. And in fact, Nebuchadnezzar says in chapter 3, who can save you from my hand? And so this disembodied hand shows up and begins to write the truth of the world and of history and of the judgment of the world on the wall. And this king who thought the world was in his hands realizes that it's somebody else has power, but it's unclear to him who it is, who's behind the hand, like who's it connected to. And that moment of shock, but also of mystery, I think is something that really sparks my imagination.
I love that chapter too. It was one of my favorites. It was really fun to work with the artist on the disembodied hand.
Oh, this is a great picture in here. Yeah.
I was just like at dinner party, and then just this giant hand shows up and starts writing things. Like, what?
That's awesome.
What was in the mind? But I think this is a great takeaway for us to kind of segue out. Grown-ups, I think this is a great conversation to have with your kids at dinner or lunch or in the car, whatever. But just this idea that I think kids can relate to this idea where that they have little to no control sometimes of their own world, and teens as well. And, I think it's a great vision to have and think about, like, what is the hand in my world? Where do I feel like I have no control over that thing or maybe that person? I think that's a great conversation starter because we all have a thing. And I think it's a great way for kids to connect that God is in the mix, and the miraculous happens all the time. It's so wild. This story is so crazy.
Go ahead.
Yeah. What were you?
I was going to say the knowledge too. Like I love that story because kids can often feel overwhelmed by the fact that they don't know. They don't understand things. They listen to the news. They know something bad's happened. They don't know what happened. They don't know what it was. They can't figure it out. There's tariffs. There's like kids are confused often by the world and what's happening. I think one of the truths that gets repeated over and over again in Daniel is, there's a lot of good stuff that you can do if you know things in the world, but the ultimate truth, is something that you can't ever figure out by studying. It's really something that you can only know by faith. And so kids can know that as well as adults, and that is that God is the one who's in control.
Brennan, we will leave with that note. That's amazing. Grown-ups, that was for you to just absorb that, take that in. And, as we think about the days ahead, we know that God is in control of all things all the time. And so get some zines, doodle a little bit, and dig into the text. Thanks, Storymakers. Thanks, Brennan.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. Today's episode of the Storymakers podcast was made possible by the Storymakers team and our generous community of donors. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, rate, and review the Storymakers podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. Share the show with a friend or two and use the code SMPodcast10 for 10% off your next adventure. Remember, be free and have fun.